Hello, everyone. Good day. My name is Joe Marigulane, and today we shall talk about John Locke's theory of the state, particularly the second treatise of civil government. Now, this discussion is limited only to the key claims of the theory, and I shall try to explain it while also giving light to other similar theories formulated by Hobbes and Rousseau and compare each based on their similarities and key differences. I shall also point out the areas in which the theory presented strengths, flaws, and some points for improvements. And lastly, we shall try and answer the question as to whether the theory is still relevant, especially now in our present time. Moving on to the discussion, let us first answer the question, what is the second treatise of civil government? John Locke's second treatise of government is a political treatise that was published in 1689. It is a foundational text of modern liberal political philosophy and is also often seen as a justification for the Glorious Revolution of 1688 in England. Now, in this book, the second treatise, Locke argues that individuals have natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and that governments are established to protect these rights. He argues that if a government fails to protect these rights, the people have the right to rebel and establish a new government. Now, Locke also emphasizes the idea of limited government, arguing that the government's power should be restricted by the consent of the people or by the consent of the governed. He argues that a government that exceeds its rightful authority can be legitimately resisted by the people. Now, in conclusion, the second treatise is an influential work that has had a profound impact on modern political thought, particularly on the development of liberal democracy and the idea of individual rights. Okay, moving on to John Locke's state of nature. Now, his state of nature is a hypothetical scenario which he used as a thought experiment to explore the origins of political authority. Now, according to Locke, the state of nature is a condition of human existence before the establishment of government or the society. In this hypothetical scenario, individuals are free and equal, and that there is no government to impose rules or enforce laws. Now, John Locke believed that the state of nature is characterized by a number of key features. First, he argued that in the state of nature, individuals have natural rights to life, liberty, and property. These rights are not granted by government but are inherent in human beings. Secondly, he believed that in the state of nature, individuals are in a constant state of war with one another as they compete for resources and seek to protect their own properties. And lastly, John Locke argued that in the state of nature, there is no impartial judge or authority to settle disputes, or there is no entity to enforce contracts, which makes it difficult for individuals to enter into a cooperative relationship. Now, John Locke used this state of nature as a way to explore the nature of political authority and the legitimacy of government. He again argued that individuals enter into a social contract with one another to establish a government and protect their own natural rights, their individual rights. Now, this government has the authority to make and enforce laws, but its power is limited by the consent of the people themselves or by the governed. Now, if a government fails to protect these rights, the individual rights, the natural rights, or basically if the government becomes oppressive, then the people have the right to revolt and establish a new government. However, it should be noted that Locke's political philosophy was heavily guided by his deeply held religious commitments. Now, throughout his life, he accepted the existence of a creating God and the notion that all humans are God's servants in virtue of that relationship. Now, moving on to the discussion, we shall compare this theory of the nature of the state. John Locke's conception of the state of nature is often contrasted with these works by the works of Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. While all three philosophers use the state of nature as a thought experiment to explore the origins of political authority, they do, however, differ in their views of human nature and the implications of the state of nature for the political theory. Hobbes famously argued that in the state of nature, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. He believed that humans are naturally selfish and violent, and that without a strong government to keep them in check, they would constantly be at war with one another. For Hobbes, the only way to avoid this chaos was for individuals to cede their rights to a powerful sovereign who would maintain order through force. Rousseau, on the other hand, saw that the state of nature was a peaceful and idyllic condition. He argued that humans are naturally good, but that society continues to corrupt them. For Rousseau, the only way to create let's say, a just society or a fair society was for individuals to form a social contract in which they voluntarily submit the general will of the community. Now, those are the two other theorists. Now, let's move on to Locke. John Locke's view of the state of nature is somewhat more optimistic compared to Hobbes, but more realistic than Rousseau's. Like Hobbes, John Locke believed that individuals do have a natural right to protect themselves and their property, but he also believes that they are capable of reason and cooperation. He argues that individuals in the state of nature would form a social contract to establish a government that would protect their natural rights. Unlike Hobbes, however, Locke believed that the government's power should be limited by the consent of the people themselves and that the individuals have a right to rebel against this oppressive government. Now, to make things short, let's summarize. While all the three philosophers that I have discussed use the state of nature as a theoretical construct, they do differ based on the views of human nature and the implications of this state of nature for the political theory that they have formulated. For Hobbes, he saw the state of nature as chaotic and believed in the need for a strong government. Rousseau, on the other hand, saw the state of nature as peaceful and believed in the need for a just social construct. Lastly, John Locke saw that the state of nature is a reasonable and cooperative one, but he believed that in this state of nature, there is a need for a limited government that protects the individual rights of the people. Okay, let's move on to the end goal of the society and the government. Now, in his book or in his writing, John Locke argued that the end goal of the society and the government is to protect the natural or the divine rights of the individuals, including the rights to life, liberty, and property. He believed that these rights were inherent in human beings and that the government was established mainly or primarily to protect these rights and to promote the common good of the people. According to him, the consent of the governed or the consent of the people is where the power of the state stems from. To form government and safeguard their natural rights, the people voluntarily engage into a social contract with one another. Now, lawmaking and law enforcement are within the responsibility of the government, but its authority is constrained by the agreement of the people, by the agreement within the people. Now, the people have the unending or the very just right to overthrow this oppressive government and install a new one if it fails to uphold the citizens' inherent rights or otherwise fails to act in the best interest of the people themselves. Now, John Locke believed that the role of the government was to maintain social order and promote the common good, while also respecting the natural rights of the individuals. He argued that the government should be limited in its power, with a separation of powers and checks and balances to prevent any one branch or individual from becoming too powerful. He believed in the importance of religious toleration and freedom of conscience, arguing that individuals have the right to worship as they choose without interference from the government. Now, in conclusion, this view was that the end goal of the society and the government was to create a system that protects individual rights, promotes the common good, and is accountable to the people it governs. Now that we covered most of the important points in Locke's writing, let us try and answer where he made some strong arguments, some weak ones, and what could have been improved. Now, firstly, on natural rights. One of the biggest strengths of Locke's theory is his emphasis on natural rights. He believed that each one of the people has, to a certain extent, certain rights that are essential for living, such as the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property. He justified these rights by saying that since every individual has been created equally, they have the same rights inherent within them. This idea of natural rights has been highly influential in the modern political theory and is still widely debated today. Second, John Locke emphasizes the importance of a social contract between the state and the individual. He believed that individuals give up certain rights to the state in exchange for protection and security. In a sense, this idea forms the basis of modern democratic societies, which is where citizens agree to abide by the laws in exchange for the protection and support provided by the government. Now let's move on to the weaknesses of Locke's theory. The concept of natural rights. Now, the idea of natural rights is highly controversial and contested in the modern political theory. Some argue that the rights are not innate and instead are socially constructed. Additionally, the concept of natural rights cannot be proved scientifically and sometimes leads to a prioritization of individual rights over the common good. Another weakness, incomplete perspective. His theory has been criticized for its incomplete perspective on human nature. He was a strong believer in rationality, and his theory largely ignores irrational desires or irrational motivations in individuals, which then leads to a lack of understanding of the human nature. Lastly, to answer the question, is it still relevant? Is the theory presented by John Locke still relevant? Why, of course, it is. I believe so. It's still indeed very relevant now, and I believe that it will stay that way in a significant amount of time within the future. Now, the significance of Locke's vision of political society can scarcely be exaggerated. His integration of individualism within the framework of the law of nature and his account of the origins and limits of legitimate government authority inspired the U.S. Declaration of Independence in 1776 and the broad outlines of the system of government adopted within the U.S., which is the U.S. Constitution. These assumptions are embedded in most democratic states' constitutions and human rights declarations. They have informed the debates of government policies such as individual privacy, surveillance, and the role of the state in the market economy and social welfare. Although John Locke's assumptions have been questioned and criticized by some scholars and political theorists, they still remain a basis for contemporary political thought and democratic consciousness. In this sense, John Locke's assumptions remain very relevant and influential in present times.